I think if you had told me when I was a little girl that one day, oh my goodness, I recognize those photos. That one day I'd be on the front page of the Milford Daily News and it would say that I grew up in a one-room house with no indoor plumbing, I think I would have been pretty horrified. But if you then told me that the response would have been the outpouring of affection and support and embrace that everybody in this community has given me, I don't know if I would have believed that either. It's been unbelievable, the conversations I've had. It's just been a few weeks, I'm sorry, since the book has been published. Oh, technical difficulties. The book has only been published since mid-August, and I have heard so many people's life stories. People have come into my office at work and said, Catherine, this reminded me of the time my family's house burned down and then we had nothing for weeks. And I've heard so many stories like this. For some reason, this book seems to just stir some pot for people and makes them remember their own stories. It just sends them flying back, whether they knew me or whether they knew this town or not. It just seems to have that effect on people, and that's been a big surprise. The biggest surprise is that I thought I was unlike anybody else. I thought this way that my family lived was an aberration. We were just off the charts. Nobody like us. And I've been hearing over and over and over again things that people had in common with me, people they remembered, people in my family they knew. I have felt more connected with the planet in the past few weeks than I've ever felt in my life. And that's a great irony that it took me this long to realize how interconnected I am with everybody in this area. It's been really a surprise. I'm really sorry that I can't show you the pictures I brought tonight. I'm trying to figure out if I try to do a video of them and put them online or come back another time, I don't know. But I had some pictures of houses. Houses have always been really interesting to me. I've always thought houses define us. They shape our view of the world. It can determine our health and well-being. It can determine how we connect to other people. I think our houses inhabit us in more ways than we inhabit them. I've always been fascinated by that. Now, I happen to have been raised in a one-room house, one of a family of 7 on the outskirts of Milford. But I have to say that for me, I think this was one of the great blessings of my life. It was one of the great advantages I had. Because for me, it was a motivator. It was a powerful motivator. It made me want to just propel myself out in the world. It made me want to do well in school. It made me want to earn money and do well in my job because I wanted to earn enough money to help my family build their first decent house. And it motivated me in many, many ways. So I feel very lucky. I feel lucky that I did well in school and I had so many wonderful teachers who saw something in me and encouraged me and told me I could do anything. And not everybody gets that. Not everybody has that advantage. I had a lot of advantages, and I'm very grateful for that. Now, I can't show you the picture that I was going to start by showing you of the house. There's now a house on 13 Prairie Street that I helped my family build in 1986. It's still there. We built this house, and I didn't know then when this house went up, it's a split-level modular house, that the land underneath it was once a gladiolus farm. I didn't know that. I didn't know that until many, many years later, that 5-foot-high blooms over a whole acre were once under this house. It took me a long time before I found that out. So I'm sorry I can't show you a picture of the house, but I can do a reading from you. The first chapter, I have a couple of short excerpts in between telling you about the book. And this is, I can give you a short reading from chapter 1. It's called The New House. 1986. This was the day a house would be born. This was the day. A day like tall windows with sunlight streaming through. A perfect January day with the sky so clear it could blind you with its blue light. This was a day like New Year's Day, out with the old, in with the new. The old house, rickety, shoddy, one-room structure would soon be over and done with. Still standing after 40 New England winters, it was a house never meant to be seen, never meant to be lived in, but it was lived in by a family of 7, no less. Set back far from the road at the end of a long dirt driveway, mercifully hidden behind a stand of sugar maple trees, it would soon be bulldozed, bashed in, and forgotten. A new house would rise on the same acre of land, but this one close to the road where people could see it, drinking in the full light of day. A house would fall, a new house would rise to take its place, and I would be there to see it. As I drove west out of Boston that morning, the Mass Turnpike rimmed with grizzled snow on both sides, the winter sun was glaring through a windshield streaked with a fine lace of road salt. I drove intently, as if guided by a taut string stretched between 2 pushpins on a map, Boston at one end, and the other a place I never spoke about, a strange place I once called home. 13 Prairie Street, Milford, Massachusetts, a lonely scrap of earth on the outskirts of a fading mill town. I spent the first 17 years of my life there, and my mother and brother had never left it. There was a time I couldn't wait to get away from it. Today, I couldn't get there fast enough. This was a day a house would be born. As I turned onto Prairie Street, I could see Ma and Jerry up ahead, standing at the foot of the driveway as if too impatient to wait indoors. I soon joined them, the 3 of us standing together in the bitter cold, saying nothing, our faces all turned in the same direction, wearing the dumbstruck expressions of immigrants about to embark on a foreign shore. And then we heard it, the rumbling of 2 giant trucks turning onto Prairie Street, all decked out in red flags to trumpet their oversized loads. Each one carried a section of the new house on its back. My mother gasped softly, "Here it comes." It was a factory-built wonder, clad in cream-colored vinyl with black shutters, fully finished inside. The pieces were interlocking like a giant dollhouse, ready to be hoisted by crane and lowered onto the waiting foundation. And before we knew it, in a matter of hours, there it was, the long-awaited dream house, all snapped together, clean and perfect, beckoning us to step inside. Ma was giddy as a child, snapping instant pictures with her favorite Polaroid, invariably getting her thumb into every shot. The camera whirred and clicked as it spat out glossy photos one by one. She took pictures of everything: the brass doorknobs, the beige wall-to-wall carpet, the closets with folding doors, the powder blue porcelain toilet and matching sink. And why? She had gone without these basic niceties most of her life. She was chronicling her entrance into the modern world. She was trading her outhouse for a flushing toilet, her wood-burning stove for a shiny electric range, aluminum pails of drinking water hand-carried from the well, for hot and cold running tap water. And who could believe it? There was even a dishwasher. Anyone passing by on the street that day would have had no idea what a crowning achievement it was for this particular family to step into this simple split-level house. So that's the new house. I'm sure I can show you a picture of the old house, but I had a picture of myself about 14 or so with my little brother, the dirt ground that was never paved in front of the house, the cinder block chimney on the outside. I never knew when I was growing up there that there was ever a gladiolus farm there. It was a farm that we used to grow subsistence crops to feed ourselves. And my father was a great hunter and fisher that would supplement whatever we grew ourselves. The place that I grew was very different from the house where I grew up. And I'm going to read a little bit about the old house. Another small excerpt. It was 1945, the year the war ended, the year my parents were married, a time of new beginnings. My father was 38 years old and my mother 25. The newlyweds had set up housekeeping in a small apartment close to town while my father set to work building a house on Prairie Street. By day, he was a factory worker, one of 3,000 men building textile machinery at the Draper Corporation. On nights and weekends, he was a solitary carpenter, slowly assembling a tiny one-room structure with his own hands. I heard stories when I was a girl, just snippets here and there, about how my father did all the work himself, clearing the land with a hatchet and scythe, pouring a shallow cement foundation, running the crude electrical wiring, even laying an underground pipe from the well to supply fresh water to the house. He really had no business doing any of this work. By training, he was neither a carpenter, nor a plumber, nor an electrician. But he was a poor man, and a poor man must assume many professions that are not his own. 3 years after he started, in 1948, he declared his work complete and moved in with his wife and now 2 young daughters, Marcia, 2 years old, and Celia, 1. It was never meant to be more than a temporary dwelling. It couldn't have been. Made from scraps of cheap lumber, some of it salvaged one stick at a time from demolished buildings, the house was a patchwork of mismatched cedar shingles, ill-fitting windows, and crumbling sheetrock, all stitched together to form an outbuilding of sorts, a passable barn perhaps, but never a house. Surely this was never meant to be a permanent house. And yet for my parents, this unlikely starter home was a place to call their own, to be free from the watchful gaze of landlords and disapproving families. What were they thinking when they moved into this makeshift structure? Maybe they thought it would be fun, a kind of adventure even. And once they were on their feet, a real house could be built, something closer to the road and in public view, and not hidden behind the trees at the end of a long dirt driveway, a ribbon of wild grass between 2 golden brown tire tracks. The house was as far back from the street as it could go without pushing its face against the tall pine forest that bordered the land. The house had a single door with a glass window that looked toward the woods, as if it were turning its back on Prairie Street and anybody who might pass there. A stack of cinder blocks formed the narrow chimney on the outside wall to accommodate a massive wood-burning stove on clawed feet. That stove was the biggest thing in the house, a good 6 feet wide and over 5 feet tall, with all its extensions and shelves, coated with pale yellow enamel trimmed in green. It would occupy an entire wall on the left side of the door, a source of coal and wood-fired heat in the winter, and a place to cook year-round. A double basin utility sink, the only water source in the house, was on the other side of the door. That left the 3rd corner for a large iron bed, and the 4th corner for the rough ladder-like steps to the upper loft. The steps terminated abruptly against the wall on the lower level, forcing anyone descending them to step sideways down to the floor. Surely this strange architecture was never intended as a permanent place to live. How else would you explain the lack of forethought to delineating space into rooms, or the absence of central heating, an indoor toilet, cabinets, closets, or a telephone? No one would approve this space as fit for human habitation, but 40 years later, this temporary structure would still be the only place a family with 5 children called home. The most ordinary things in other people's houses amazed me. Radiators, we didn't have those. Flowered wallpaper, kitchen cabinets, windows that were properly caulked and sealed, that opened and shut, and didn't crust over with white winter frost inside and out. Ceilings with swirls of plaster, not planks with rusty nails poking through. There would be no birthday parties, no sleepovers, no dinner guests, no boys to come calling on a Saturday night. Instead, the house kept every possible friend at arm's length. I became expert at spinning excuses to keep people away. No, let's meet at your house, not mine. I'll wait for you at the corner of the street. No need to drive me home, just drop me off here. And on and on. I was a fortress, ringed round and round with a protective moat of excuses. I couldn't wait to leave home. In 1972, at the age of 17, I moved away to go to college and never lived in that house again. I was always a good student, and that was my ticket to escape. I got scholarships and work-study grants and summer jobs, enough to get me through 4 years of a fine liberal arts college. I worked, I traveled, I had a career and a car and a condo and a life in Boston, my own private little universe. I live in a sunny Queen Anne Victorian with turrets and bay windows and fine architectural details, furnished abundantly with beautiful objects and friends of my own choosing. But I never talked about my roots with anyone, not even my most intimate friends, not even the man who shared my bed. I even suppressed my Boston accent so no one would ever guess where I came from. It's not that I forgot my family, far from it. I thought if I worked hard enough, invested and saved and planned ahead, I'd be able to set aside enough money to get my family out of that house. But then in 1984, my plan got an unexpected boost. My mother received an insurance settlement, $40,000. It was an unheard of sum. My mother had never seen that many zeros in her bank balance. By then, I was in a position to chip in a matching amount from my own savings, and that would be all that was needed to break ground on a new house. Now the long-awaited house was here, and I had the great joy of knowing I had a hand in its making. The past that always haunted us could now be put to rest. The old shack, once emptied of its few useful possessions, could be knocked down and carted away. We could declare a victory. My story should have ended here, but how could I have thought that 40 years could be undone in a single stroke? There was so much I didn't know. The tale of the old house and the untold chapters written in its rotting timbers were only just beginning to be told. So my mother had a cedar chest. I don't know how many people here still remember oak chests. These were a big deal in the 1930s and 40s. Young women would put things in their cedar chest, their hope chest, for their hoped-for marriage. They'd put linens and domestic items in there. And my mother had a beautiful Lane cedar chest, beautiful burl walnut, and all sorts of fine veneers on the top. It was the fanciest thing in our house. And after she passed away in 2009, a few years later, my brother and I were cleaning out the house, and I said, well, I'm going to tackle the cedar chest. I'm going to go through all the junk that's in that cedar chest, because my mother put everything that was important to her in that cedar chest. So it had a sort of layer of history, where the further down you went, the further back in time you went, like geological strata, you dig deeper and deeper. And I found all kinds of things. I found World War II ration books with stamps still in them, unused. I found my father's draft certificate for World War II with a big rejected stamp on the back. He failed his physical. But I found all kinds of other things. I found a beautiful catalog of gladiolus from a place called Champlain View Gardens in Burlington, Vermont. And it had beautiful pictures of gladiolus. And then I found order forms for all different varieties of gladiolus. She had bought hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of gladiolus. And they had names, amazing names, like Red Charm, Lady Jane, Gold Rush, Marimba, Sensation, Purple Supreme, Candy Heart, Mermaid, White Gold, Blue Beauty. There was one called American Commander. It was bright red, something that was, probably named during World War II, a patriotic flower. And there were invoices. There were invoices to local florists. There were slips for trade magazines like Florist Monthly and Farmers Exchange. There were lots of little notations in pencil and paper, projecting expenses, managing her inventory. And I gained this sudden appreciation of my mother as an entrepreneur. I always thought she was a ragged, barefooted farmer, but she was an entrepreneur. She was an entrepreneur no less than any of the high-tech startups that I had as clients of a PR agency I ran for many years. She did everything I did when I started the business. She used paper and I used an electronic spreadsheet. I invoiced my clients, so did she. I subscribed to trade magazines, and so did she. I just never saw her as an entrepreneur. And she and my father had seen an opportunity. There was something really hot in the market, and it was called gladiolus. Everybody loved gladiolus. They were the most popular flower around. If you look at old black and white movies, and I love black and white movies from the 30s and 40s, you might see in the backdrop of elegant apartments a beautiful fan-shaped vase of gladiolus. I had a picture here of Joan Crawford wearing a gladiolus dress, which is flowers all over her dress. This was a really, really popular flower. And it would be something that a man might bring to his sweetheart on a Saturday night, a great big bouquet of gladiolus. And so they saw this opportunity and they seized it and they poured their hearts and souls into this business. Much as most entrepreneurs do. It becomes their passion and they devote everything they have to this business. And meanwhile, my father is working full-time as a jitney driver at Draper Corporation while doing all of this in his spare time. I have a picture that I was going to share of my father with a big straw hat out of the fields up to his knees in gladiolus. And the date on the photograph was July 4, which is very telling because he was working on holidays, he was working on weekends, he was working his heart out trying to make this farm go. And for whatever reason, in the 1950s, the flower just wasn't popular anymore. It just wasn't. It became used as a cheap filler flower in funeral baskets mostly. The price plunged, and the farm failed. The farm just failed. And I would piece together all kinds of other stories that had happened to my family before I was born that explained how people could work so hard and put their heart and soul in something and still be very, very, very poor. It was very sad that their dream just didn't happen. As I was writing this book, I had this idea that houses are so important. And I had this idea that I'd love to donate part of the proceeds of my book to Habitat for Humanity. And I don't know why, but I decided to write a letter to President Jimmy Carter. And I said, you are such an inspiration, not only for the fact you're a Nobel Peace Prize winner and everything else, but your work for Habitat for Humanity was very special. And I thought he, above anybody, would appreciate the power of a house to shape a person's destiny. And I said, because of his inspiration, I wanted to make this donation from my book to Habitat for Humanity. And to my absolute amazement, he wrote back. I mean, I thought I would get a form letter or something like that, or nothing at all. And instead of a stamp, I guess presidents get their own little presidential seal on the corner of the envelope. And he wrote a handwritten note on the letter that I sent him. I would have shared a picture with you tonight, but it said that he'd be happy to write a blurb from my book cover, only upon seeing the draft, of course. He wasn't just going to write it sight unseen. And he wrote as a P.S., I too was raised in a house with no indoor plumbing. So that's pretty special. So that's why there's a Habitat for Humanity connection. That's why there's a Jimmy Carter quote on my book. So by the time I came along, I was born in 1954. All of this history was over. And my mother, I have a beautiful picture I wish I could share with you. But I'm going to read a little piece about my mother. There's another piece from a later chapter. Walking up the dirt path, I squinted in the sun and I could see Ma out in the vegetable gardens, bent over from the waist, weeding the tomatoes. Her pale cotton dress was bleached nearly white from the sun. She was born and raised on a farm, and she had a special talent for making things grow. It was in her blood. My father did too. Between the two of them, the yard was ablaze in flowers. Roses, lupins, daylilies, daffodils, jonquils, tulips, and my favorite, the delicate bearded irises. Not to mention all the blossoming fruit trees, plums, peaches, apples, cherries, quince, and pear. Even in the winter, our drafty windows bloomed with red geraniums, surrounded by shallow wooden boxes of tomato seedlings with their tiny yellow blossoms, ready to plant in the spring. I was in the house, swirling a packet of purple Kool-Aid in the water-filled jelly jar, when Ma burst in through the ragged screen door, her bounty wrapped in her kitchen apron. Huge tomatoes with deep brown scars, the last of the Swiss chard, wax beans, crooked carrots, a few parched ears of corn, and zucchini squash that were left to grow to gargantuan proportions. In summer, we ate. I loved my mother's summer perfume, a heady aroma of pungent tomato plants, earth, and sweat. Her thick body was hardened from years of wielding shovels, axes, and hoes, and her large sagging breasts hung low in her shirtwaist dress. I loved her sensual girth, and the secure feeling of perching on her ample lap, as solid as sitting on oak. How proud I was the first time I was big enough to reach all the way around my mother's wide waist so my fingertips touched together behind her back. My mother wiped the sweat from her face with her crumpled apron and set to work making tomato and mayonnaise sandwiches on coarse Italian bread. I loved to watch her hands as she worked, thick, strong, and leathery, more like a man's than a woman's hands, with dark earth permanently etched under her fingernails no matter how hard she scrubbed them. She was worn and weathered all over, like the old apple tree, bearing all the marks of too many harvests, too many children, too much caring and tending for others, but never for herself, always saving the best for her husband and children, while sopping her bread with gravy from the frying pan for her supper. Well, I said earlier tonight that I learned from this book that I have a lot more friends and a lot more people with things in common with me than I realized. I wanted to share one small quote from a school classmate of mine. We had a little get-together on Cape Cod recently, and she bought 8 copies of my book for her book club. Very nice. And she wrote me this lovely note, and she said, "The friends you were ashamed to invite into your home, you now have space in the homes of their hearts." So I think that's very special. So thank you. That's all I have to read for tonight. I have books with me, and I have time to take questions. If nobody asks questions, I may read more of my books. Yes?
First of all, I want to congratulate you on not only remarkable storytelling, but remarkable. And my question is very simple.
Go ahead.
The question is very simple. When did you begin writing the book? When did it start, Joe?
Well, after my son graduated from college, my work was done. And I thought, now I'm going to devote time to all of these things I've been postponing that I wanted to do. And I went to a writer's retreat in Vermont with the idea I was going to work on poetry. I love writing poetry. And telling stories around the dinner table, this was 2013 or so, and nobody believed the stories I was telling. They said, "You did not grow up in no winter." They just didn't believe me. And somebody said to me, "You should write a memoir." Never even occurred to me. I thought you had to be somebody important and famous to write a memoir. But it got me thinking, and it was right about that time that I had the task of cleaning out my mother's cedar chest and found so many pictures and stories and pieces of the puzzle that I really wanted to put it all together. Yes?
I had seen it in school at Milford High.
You were her teacher?
Way back, in the early 60s.
Oh my.
She was very quiet.
Mm-hmm.
She loved poetry. She always had a book. It was always, is she all right?
Celia's passed away, yeah.
At what age?
She was 35. Celia had a lot of health issues. I don't want to give away too much of it.
No, it's all right.
Yeah, I'm sorry. What is your name now? Thank you. Yes.
We lived very close to you. These are my two sisters. We lived right on the corner of Hamilton Street
Oh, yes.
in that big greenhouse. And Teresa went to school with Marcia. And we were very friendly. We weren't born, but we were very friendly with Marcia and Celia. And we used to go down to your house and we used to play there. And there was a pond in front of your house and we used to skate. I don't think we had skates, but we just used our shoes or whatever we had.
You're remembering a pond in front of my house. It was actually not a pond. It would flood in the spring.
We had a lot of fun with Celia and Marcia. They were very shy, but
Yeah, they were very, very shy, and they're very quiet is what I've heard.
and I remember your mother very well because when I would knock on the door, we would stand like right at the threshold, and your mother was always sitting exactly where you said, and she was beautiful, beautiful. Beautiful face. She was beautiful, and she was always very nice to us and everything. And we just remember playing down there a lot. I don't remember what we did. I think we just played outside with, with kids. But, yeah, I know. We remember a lot.
Thank you for sharing that.
Are you related to the Merenghis on Milford Street?
Yes, yes. That was my grandparents' house.
Okay, because I used to go to plain school, and grades 1 through 6, and we had a cafeteria, so we'd walk home every lunchtime. And I lived on Carroll Street, which is right off of Payton Street. And I remember going by, and it's a lovely home, Merenghis.
Yeah, they had a very large, lovely
Stone
house.
wall in front of it, and it had an apple tree, and I think it was an apple tree, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was. And the apple tree was between the house and the stone wall, so that the branches would go over onto the street. So when I went home from school in the fall, apples, like no one picked them. So I decided to take a couple myself. Some would drop on the ground.
We won't come after you.
And I remember a red-haired girl, and it must have been her mother.
Probably my sister.
Or your sister.
My sister always looked a lot older than me, and people always thought she was my mother. She was 8 years older than me.
And were there 2 ladies that lived in the house? 2?
Depends on when you mean.
I can remember a dark-haired woman with a braid.
That could have been Shazira.
Oh,
Yeah, she has braids.
well, that's what you would remember. You were on the street. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Joe, and I just wanted to say that I just started to write my memoir as well. It's probably going to be X-rated. I was going to ask you, the question is, how do you go about even considering to get it published? But you did mention that your son was in publishing.
Yeah, it didn't help me to have a
Didn't
son.
help you? I just wanted to make one comment. It's kind of like a little correction from my perspective. You did not grow up poor. You were very rich in a lot of ways.
I agree with you.
My name's John, and I just wanted to say that I went to school with your brother, Steve.
Oh, it's Stephen. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. So Stephen would have been nice. Sir, may I ask your names? I'm sorry.
Okay, and
I'll talk to you later, sir, okay? Yes.
Hi, Kathy. Kathy, can you tell us the name of the little girl who lived in the trailer whose father was in the attic?
I know who.
Is she here? Is she here? Sandy's here. I received a lovely bouquet of gladiolus over here from the little girl. Signed from the little girl, and I suspect it is Sandy Petroselli of Parisi.
I remember the gladiolus. I just remember them. They would sell them sometimes. Family would sell them.
My family sold them sometimes directly to people,
Yeah.
and they would sell them to florists
60
too.
cents for a dozen.
60 cents a dozen.
Beautiful gladiolus.
I think they should have charged more.
Skates on the little pond. Maybe it wasn't a pond too, but my first pair of ice skates, my brother bought, my sister and I.
You know, maybe it was across the street, there was like a little swampy area. No, it was in front of my
It
house.
was in front, yeah.
To the left, to the left of
Was it the
your
Thomasetti's
To
house?
the left of the house, in front of the house. To the left, that's where it was.
Yes, that's not, that wasn't ours, yeah, that was the Thomasetti house,
Thomasetti.
yeah.
And we did ice skates, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that would make sense,
And I
yeah.
distinctly remember the
There's a
river.
pond. This gentleman knows the Thomasetti's, yeah.
Okay. I can remember the gladiolus very well.
Yes, sir.
Were your grandparents from Mendon?
My mother's side, yes. Bertha and Raymond Thomas lived on Old Providence Road, yeah. Do you know them?
Yes.
I need to write a book about that side of the family. Yes.
I live across the street, 13 Prairie Street. I can remember years ago, your mom got locked out of the house, the new house. My husband saw her standing out in the pouring rain. We went over to get her. She was very uneasy, very uneasy. I said, please come over to my house. She says, I need to use your phone. She wanted to call Jerry so she could get a key to get back in the house. Also, another question. Behind that your house that is there now, there's, I don't want to say shed.
Yeah, we call that this little barn, yeah.
Do you know anything about it?
I think it was used, there was a farm that was there before, it was a pig farm there before my parents bought it. And it was just a little shed with a stone floor. I wasn't sure if somebody lived there or if it was a storage shed for them. But we used it to put the plow in and just farm stuff like that.
In the book, obviously.
That might still be there, I don't know.
It is. So, of course, myself went over today. This was the original home.
No, it wasn't our house. Our house was further behind that. And the house we lived in was gone. It's been bulldozed.
Yes, I knew your mom well, and I knew Jerry.
Very good.
Yeah.
Yes.
I wanted to compliment you on the book first of all, but also the cover image is so striking. Having a younger brother who was very dear to me. Did you always know when you were writing the book if this was your published or like that to be like commitment?
Well, when I started writing it, I did want to get it published. It started just sort of taking off all by itself with all these pieces that were coming together. It's very hard to get a book published. Publishers don't like to take any risks. They like to publish books by people who are already best-selling authors. So that makes it really hard if you don't have a best-selling book. I went with a publisher that has sort of a hybrid, self-publishing, traditional approach. It's a traditional publisher, but for new writers, they have a program where you can help invest in the marketing and editing costs. And then if your book sells anything, you get the payment back. So that seems very fair. And I would have paid that money anyway if I self-published. But self-publishing can be bad if you don't know all the work you need to do to get it properly edited, and you can't just put it out there. You really need to invest a lot of time and money in it. So it can be expensive to do if you do it on your own. But getting a literary agent is very difficult, and agents too are very risk averse. So it's a hard process, and very, very, very few books make any money. But if you do it as a labor of love, I think it's very much worth doing. Anyone else?
Do you know of any houses that are still existing in the Milford area that are similar to yours in any way?
I didn't, no. I got a lovely call from an elderly woman named Elia Toscas. You know Elia, 98 she told me. 98 years old, completely lucid, reads lots of books. And she wanted me to call her because she said she saw the name on the book and she said it just hit me. I know this family, I know this person. She said she knew my father, she said she knew my grandmother. She invited me over to her house to have coffee, which I did do. She's absolutely lovely, absolutely lovely. She reads 2 or 3 books a week. Couldn't be, more clear, just a lovely woman. And so I gave her a copy of my book.
I have a follow-up. I know.
I'm sorry, I mentioned that because she told me that she grew up on a house not too far from mine, and she said they had no indoor plumbing too, but it might have been the 30s or 40s. She might have been thinking a long time ago when that was more common.
And she's been a member of the Friends for 4 years.
She told me the funniest thing. She said she chooses her books very selectively. She said, at my age, you really need to be selective.
I was just going to say, I'm a youngin' when it comes to living in Milford. I've only been here for 12 years. I apologize. I grew up in South Jersey, and there really is a reason that we're called the Garden State. Where I grew up, we were surrounded by tomatoes. The thing I wanted to mention is that I was taken care of by my grandmother, who lived in the first house in Vineland, New Jersey, which was in the middle of a park. And they still have that house. They moved it, but it brings back memories. The whole town was mostly Italian and Jewish, and my mother's mother was French, so there you go.
I used to be Miss Creation, and I had you in school with Stacy, and I am very, very proud of your success. Congratulations.